Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Pune is the best city when it comes to local governance and Bengaluru the worst, says a new study conducted across India. Delhi, which ranked 6th among 23 Indian cities surveyed, improved its position this year with a score of 4.4 out of 10 in the annual city governance rankings. Pune, with a score of 5.1, ranked first, followed by Kolkata, Thiruvananthapuram, Bhubaneswar and Surat, said the annual survey of India's city system undertaken for 2017 by non-profit organization Janaagraha Centre for Citizenship and Democracy. The study evaluated the quality of governance by analysing the functioning of urban local bodies in 23 major cities across 20 states. The cities scored between 3 and 5.1 on a scale of 10. The survey looked at governance in other countries to explain where Indian metros stand when compared with some megacities elsewhere. Johannesburg in South Africa, London in the UK and New York in the US scored 7.6, 8.8 and 8.8 respectively. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse the state of our cities. Joining me on the program today are K.T. Ravindran, Dean Emeritus, Rick's School of Built Environment. Vivek Nair, Head Annual Survey of India's City System, Janaagraha. And Kunal, Kumar, Municipal Commissioner, Pune Municipal Corporation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Vivek Anandan Nair, I'd like to begin with you, of course, and find out what was the methodology used in this survey.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to also mention that, like you said, this is a measure of governance indicators, which essentially mean that this is a measure of the qualities of the laws, the policies, the institutions that our cities have at their base, right? This is not a measure of the outcome indicators. This is not a measure of the air pollution that we see, the garbage crisis we see, etc., etc. And therefore, the methodology for us really involves looking at a lot of laws. And if you have gone across or gone through the report that we mentioned, we've covered roughly 50 plus laws across these 26 cities. We've looked at over 100 plus financial documents. We've looked at master plans of cities. We've filed over 200 RTIs, and this is just the first filing, not the appeals, right? So we've collected a bunch of data from municipalities, and quite a few of them have been generous enough to provide us the data that we ask, including the financials of the institution. And then we use our own objective metrics to analyze questions, right? So let me give you an example. There's a question that we have which looks at voter participation in cities. That's a proxy of how involved the citizens are in a city with not the state or the central government, with the urban local body, the municipality, which is essentially the primary service provider for all of us. So there's a score. If a city scores, let's say 70%, they're scored 7 out of 10. Right. So like that, we have in total about 150 parameters that span across what Janaagraha calls the city systems framework. Essentially,
so are these international standards or what are they? I mean,
so they're largely drawn from not just international standards, but also from our landmark 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. This conforms largely to the spirit of decentralization and what cities essentially need to be able to provide good quality of life. Now, the city systems framework, the components that I will hopefully talk about in the discussion with you, are what are prerequisites for cities to provide a good quality of life to citizens.
Okay, so what these prerequisites are, we'll get to in just a bit. Sure. But before that, let me get in Professor Ravindran. If you look at the best placed city, Professor, the score is 5.1, which is Pune, and then it's all way below that. Some of the cities ranking about 3, 3.1 and so on and so forth. Why is it that our cities fare so poorly in some of these rankings?
In my opinion, the survey actually points to the main or the primary malady in our urban system, that is local governance. Unfortunately, we have a hierarchy of bodies which are identified in the 74th Amendment, of which the central government has the strongest think tanks and outputs and economists and so on. And as you go down the ladder, at the lowest rung is the local municipality, local body, and that has the least amount of capability. And unfortunately for us, it is the quality of their delivery and the processes that they use is what determines quality of life in our cities. So in fact, which is why we find our urban centers in a big mess, because we have not given sufficient attention to local bodies.
So going forward, then would you say that we need to strengthen our local bodies?
Absolutely. I think that one of the first things that we need to do is that we have now, for instance, introduced in the last few years, we have introduced large number of urban improvement schemes. Now, why is it that we are not able to make much headway in those programs? It's precisely because the local bodies don't have the capability and the capacity to deliver. So, in my view, one of the first things that we need to do is to build capacity building in local bodies as a primary aspect of any project. If you take, for instance, smart cities project, local bodies just don't know how to deal with the corporatization of the SPVs. They don't know how to deal with large consultants who come and speak a totally different language to them. So they are at loss to be able to cope with the processes which are unleashed by this large money which is brought in from the central government aid. So the result is we have only 1.8% of the money that is allocated for smart cities picked up till now.
Sure. Sure. We'll talk about some of the other missions also possibly ahead in the program. For instance, Swachh Bharat, Amrut, and some of the other missions and what kind of a role they've had as far as some of these cities are concerned. But before that, let me get in Kunal Kumar, Municipal Commissioner, Pune Municipal Corporation. Kunal Kumar, first and foremost, congratulations being placed first on this particular survey. What has worked for Pune? What is it that Pune is doing that the other cities aren't?
Well, first of all, many thanks for the congratulations. Yes, we understand we are at 5.1 and there are cities across the world which are at 7, 8 and 8.8 and so on. But hey, it's not something that we should lose our heart on. I think our cities have started to work on urban development issues fairly late in the day. In fact, most of our country was supposed to be a rural country till very recently. And so I think, it has taken time for us to realize that urbanization is the way forward. And now, the momentum is picking up. I think what has worked in Pune's favor is clearly its, focus on the foundational aspects of governance. We understand that, human resources is very important. So we worked very hard in augmenting our human resources. We've seen you build capacity within our human resources, kind of got into collaborations with the best organizations around the world and countries around the world to see that we understand things much better. Then we've worked on our finances, we've worked on raising our tax revenues, we've worked on strengthening ourselves financially to get ourselves a credit rating of AA+, wherein we can go into the markets. And in fact, last year we just kind of became the first municipal corporation after the new SEBI guidelines to raise municipal bonds from the BSE. Then of course we've worked on technology, on taking our corporation closer to people, bringing in more transparency, getting in more online systems, making people easily access those systems. So these are things which not only connect us to the community, also build confidence among the people that the civic body is kind of very responsive, and to that extent you get a lot of support for your work, and I think this all capitalizes into helping each of our activities actually bear much more better fruits when we undertake them.
Okay, all right. I'm glad that you accepted the fact that 5.1, the score of 5.1 is pretty low and there's a long way to go really, and there's a scope for a lot of improvement. We hope that happens soon. Let me bring in Vivek now. Vivek, something that the professor was talking about, several missions like the smart city missions, some of the missions that I spoke about as well, or I mentioned, several initiatives have been taken over the last few years. What impact have they had on our big cities?
So upfront, I'd like to say that the impact on the big cities might, in our survey per se, might not be very tangible, because you understand there's 180 parameters. The things that we assess are quite a lot. So the few of the reforms that have come in have definitely helped. But I'd like to point out that it's the smaller cities that are doing a lot on some of the reform imperatives let's say, mandated under Amrut. So it's not so much the bigger cities who are doing this, but the Surats and the Ranchis and the
Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities.
Exactly.
Really.
So
yes.
they are doing a lot, especially when it comes to what we call a framework that I said I'd talk about earlier. One of the wings of that framework is called transparency, accountability and participation. We're an IT powerhouse, right, as a country. Now the lowest hanging fruit is to make the reams of information that's available with the government put out into the public domain, so the public can make good of it and engage with governments in a more meaningful way than just, let's say, looking at the garbage issue outside on the roads, right? One of the things that our reports also tries to do is that push the envelope from not just government, public, but also governments to engage at more systemic level. We cannot continue to talk about the garbage issue, etc., etc. So on that end, I see a lot of the smaller cities have acted on the reforms mentioned in Amrut on the transparency end. The rest, we're yet to see. Okay. If you see the front page of the report, it says that reforms have been painfully slow. So I'd like to stick with that observation for now.
Okay, reforms have been painfully slow is your observation. You know, Professor Ravindran, he spoke about India being an IT powerhouse. Unfortunately, our Silicon City, the IT hub of India, languishes at the last place, yes. Rock bottom, really, as far as Bengaluru is concerned. You know, Bengaluru is considered to be, you know, a retiree's paradise, you know, garden city of the country, yet it fares
that
so
was
poorly.
Long ago.
Yes, what is the problem really?
Well, I find that one of the problems that one can identify in this is also the larger political instability in the states. You find that in states which are relatively more stable, there is possibility for delivering better governance at municipal level. And if you take, for instance, in the case of Bhubaneswar, which has had continuous political stability, today it stands very high on almost every indicator that comes out.
If I may butt in, Bhubaneswar has moved from 16 to 10 to number 4 now, which speaks to what Professor is just saying. Sorry.
Absolutely. So, in fact, the smaller the size of the city, easier it is for them to deal with these systems.
Indeed. If you look at the survey itself, Chennai, Mumbai, Delhi don't seem to be doing very well.
No, for that matter, Calcutta seems to have done well, which is a surprise to me. And Vivek has an explanation saying that Calcutta has steadily indicated in the last 3-4 years a very high ranking as far as the governance processes are concerned. Not in what it delivers, not in what the quality of life is, but in the processes which are in place. So Calcutta has also had relative political stability. So I think the key to the issue is then political stability. One of the issues is political stability. Second thing is that how well have they been, for instance, some of these are smart cities and some others are not. Okay. Now in the case of the smart cities, you can what has been designated as smart cities, you can see that there has been much better governance systems being put in place because the smart city mission demands those things to be in place.
Indeed. You know, Kunal, Kumar, you know, as far as these cities' authorities are concerned, what are the lessons to be learned from the authorities from this survey?
Well, I think, you know, one of the lessons we need to learn is that nothing can be built without a strong foundation. And I appreciate the survey to focus on governance and its foundational surveys which focus on foundational elements is important for outputs.
Well, we seem to have some technical difficulties there with the line with Kunal Kumar, of course, so we'll try and reconnect with him. But in the meantime, let me bring back Vivek into the picture. You know, so what are the lessons to be learned from this survey and what needs to be done immediately?
Well, immediately there are a lot of things to be done, but I would like again to pull back a little bit into the question that you had asked Professor earlier about the fact that should we now strengthen municipalities. I would say, to also partly answer the question you currently asked me, is that is the only way ahead for us. We are urbanizing at a rapid pace. If not at the percentage, the masses of people who are moving to cities is huge, right? By 2030, 2040, we would have almost the entire population of Europe residing in India's cities. So therefore, the only way out is to strengthen our cities. So some of the lessons that we can take away from the survey over the years have been steady. We've tried to present the messaging in different ways, but there are 5 big takeaways that come out of this survey. A lot of that can be actioned quickly. Some of them cannot be actioned quickly because it involves huge amounts of political will, decentralization, etc. So the first thing is that we need better planning for our cities, right? And Professor Ravindran is an expert in that. Our cities currently do not have tiered spatial participatory planning processes. That is a big issue, because if you're not planning for the future cities, we're not going to do anything good. The second big issue is when it comes to finances, and this is weak on three aspects: both generation of revenue, management of revenue, and accountability towards how it's being spent. The third, which also Professor talked about, was about the staffing. There is barely any capability with municipalities when you compare it with the other world. So, and this is on the counts of adequacy. The report says that there's about 35% vacancy, and to my mind, that is a very conservative number. It is likely to be far higher, and the numbers that they estimated are quite old. So that's the third big problem. The fourth problem is that cities are not looked at governance entities, right? The mayors are not the ones who are calling the shots in cities. It's the parastatals. Something that we did in Bangalore about 2 years ago was looked at the amount of funds that is spent by the council versus the funds that is spent by state department and parastatals, which is other agencies that serve citizens. The council gets to decide for only about 40% of the money, which means 60% of the money spent on providing services to citizens is not done by the city government, right? And the last, but one of the most important and crucial for a democracy, is that there is an absence of participatory citizen platforms. So there is no platform like an Area Sabha or a Ward Sabha that has been institutionalized where citizens can partake in governance, which is crucial to any successful democracy.
Sure, we need better planning is what you're suggesting. You know, Professor Ravindran, the survey also finds that some of our cities are grossly unprepared. Why is that so? I mean, why do we fare so poorly after all these years?
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. But I would say the primary reason is that the planning mechanisms that we have in place and the planning institutions that we have in place are very archaic. They're following systems which have been followed in the 60s and 70s. And they don't function, the cities don't function in that manner anymore. That time when the planning departments were set in place, it was seen as an extended arm of the socialist governance in which the city will prepare good living conditions and deliver it to its citizens. But today's terms, the whole economies of cities and the manner in which private parties participate in the development process, in the manner in which monies flow from outside the municipalities, etc., they have all changed. All the rules of the games have changed. But the planning systems have not changed. Planning systems are still using the age-old, 50-year-old principles which don't really apply anymore. This is one side of the issue. Second thing is that if you want to look at real quality of life that happens, that changes within cities, and if you want to put in mechanisms which are, say, participatory, you have to have tangible issues which the citizens can absorb in front of them for them to participate in the decision-making process. A master plan is not a tangible entity.
Okay.
It's an abstract entity. It uses number of colors and lines, and in fact, most people are not planning literate. They can't even read the maps, leave alone read the complex text and the charts, etc., which are given in the master plan document. So if you want to present tangible schemes in front of the citizens in which they can participate in the decision making, you have to have urban design brought in instead of just urban planning, which deals with the two-dimensional side of the city.
How important is citizens' participation in a city going forward?
Well, we are a democracy.
A government can only do that much, or a concerned authority can only do that much if the citizens are not involved.
No, citizens are not made aware of what they have to be involved in. For instance, if you look at the way Delhi master plan is being put in place, you have a master plan which is prepared in relative secrecy. They have a number of seminars, etc., in high places like the India International Center and Habitat Center and so on. They have some seminars and they say this is a participatory process. Here is the plan, which is an outcome of a participatory process. We have had 30 odd public meetings, etc. But who is this public who is coming to these meetings? And what are the interest groups which are represented there? That becomes a political issue. Now, besides this, one also finds that once the master plan is promulgated, passed as an act of law through the government, it becomes a piece of document, legally binding document. Then they prepare a zonal development plan, which also is then passed legally, and it becomes a legal document. Then they go to the people and say, come on now, participate in your plan making process. That is putting the cart before the horse.
Okay, all right. Taking the discussion forward now. Vivek, as far as if you compare Indian cities with the cities abroad, the Western cities, where is it that we fare most poorly?
I would say two aspects. Number one being the capacities in terms of human resources that we have, the skills, the adequacy, the incentivization of performance or performance management processes, and the span of control, right? So to give you an example, we have, with studies that we did in Rajasthan earlier, we figured out that there's barely 3% of the managing cadre, right? About 97 odd % is the cadre that implements, which is not a very sustainable way to function. Right, and the amount of vacancies that we in the city. The second big thing is, of course, planning. In the course, we've of course looked at New York, London, and Johannesburg for the purposes of this study, but we also happen to have interactions with Greater Manchester.
So why were these cities chosen in particular, London, Johannesburg, and New York?
Well, London and New York have been a part of the study for a while now, and it's because globally they're accepted as one of the best functioning cities, right? Johannesburg is one city that we picked because we need closer to home examples. It's only when we look at cities like Joburg or like, let's say, in the Philippines or somewhere close to us, that we get a real sense of how far we are. So there is the ideal, London, New York, but what else could we have achieved at this point in time? Is it a Joburg? Is that 5 to 7 gap too much? How long do we have before we bridge it?
Is the gap too much?
That gap is definitely too much.
Too much.
Okay, yes, Professor. The gap is too much.
Certainly
what
too
should
much.
our key focus areas be to close the gap?
In my view, I'd repeat once again, it is the training and capacity building at the municipal level which only can change our cities. We don't have the requisite capacity to either plan, deliver, or maintain. We don't have the capacity at present. We have the number of people that is required to fill all the posts. Now, his survey, Mr. Nair's survey also shows that in some municipalities there's a 60% vacancy. Yeah? There's huge amount of vacancies, which apart, even the quality of the manpower that we have in these municipalities are abysmal.
Yeah.
Very often they're not even able.
The survey has said commissioners were found to have had only 2.7 years of experience in urban management. I mean, 2.7 years of experience is abysmal, Professor.
Certainly, it is abysmal. And more than that, as far as the 74th Amendment is concerned, the commissioners should not be having a role there. They should be retitled as secretaries to the municipal corporations, not as commissioners. Commissioners were traditionally the arm of the state government, which then through whom the money was transferred into the municipal corporation, and therefore they retained a very high level of control from the, say, quote unquote, the state level control in the municipal governance. Now, the commissioner was the primary agent of that control. Now, that person has no role to play there. We should be having a secretary who functions under the mayor of the city, and who then takes the shot, calls the shots, prepares the plans, and ensures that there's a participatory process through the elected representatives, and then firms up the planning
So
process.
there is some reconstruction needed there too.
Absolutely, the whole instrument,
Restructuring, yeah.
the whole instrument needs to be reconstructed.
Sure. All right. Kunal Kumar joins us on the phone line now because he doesn't seem to be getting connected on Skype at the moment. Kunal Kumar, you were making a point about what are the takeaways for the municipal corporations and authorities at the city level from this survey. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that it's very important that we understand that, we talk of outputs, and most of the time, citizens and newspapers and media want to know what outputs are happening and how many good projects have been delivered in a city, but hardly anybody talks of, the foundational elements. Policies are so important. If we have to, solve the issues related to transport in most of our Indian cities today, I think, a lot of it has to do with policy, whether it is parking policy, whether it is transit-oriented development, whether it is your street design guidelines, whether it is your bicycle policy, your policy to, regulate private vehicle movement in the city and promote public transport in the city. So much to do with policy, and hardly anyone talks about those, and everyone wants results as far as transport and traffic congestion is concerned. So a very vital thing which comes out of this survey is that you need to work on your policy. The second thing which comes out is that, you need to see how much, autonomy and how much of evolution of powers that has happened to the corporations. Because unless and until that happens, a lot of it is dependent on the state governments and other bodies, and you really cannot perform in such an environment. The third thing which comes out is, how effective our planning processes are, and our planning processes have to do with a lot to do with what we actually are able to deliver in the city. So if we are having cumbersome processes, if we have processes which take huge amount of time and energy, then they're not going to really work out. How good we are at our finances, how elaborate are our financial laws, how well we handle our financials is very important to look at. And all of these, I think, are very foundational elements. When we are able to work on this, I think we'll be very, we'll be ready to deliver the kind of outputs that the citizens require or the city requires.
Right. All right. Kunal, Kumar, thank you so much for joining us on the program and sharing your inputs. Quick closing comments from both my guests in our studio right now, beginning with you, Vivek, on the way forward.
Well, I'd like to reiterate the importance of cities as a start, right? Because a lot of the discussions have been about how we make cities better, but one thing I think we've missed out on in this conversation is the fact that the mayors are not empowered. Professor Ravindran talked about how it is not the commissioner, but it is the mayor. We need to evolve to a process where cities are seen as democratic units of governance, units of economy. Right? This is the model that a lot of successful cities have followed outside. They have metropolitan systems. These are the kind of systems we need to move towards. And at the same time, governments and citizens need to realize that we need to look at the problems that our cities have, not at the symptomatic level, but as a systems level.
Sure.
Only then will we be able to fix the problem of our cities.
All right. Professor?
So I would harp back on going to the provisions in the 74th Amendment, which I think was one of the most progressive policies of governance that we have had in this country for a long time. And unfortunately, most states have not adopted the 74th Amendment, which would give the kind of autonomy Nair just talked about to the local body, and their ability to interact with the population on a participatory basis also will increase enormously if they are empowered to do so. And if they are preparing the master plan, which is not the case in most cities now, you have a development body which is headed by a politician or a high level bureaucrat, which is actually calling the shots in preparing the master plan. Whereas it should have been vested with the elected representatives in the municipal body.
Sure. As
per the 74th Amendment. If they are given the right to prepare the plan, and if that plan is anchored in the smaller units within the municipality, then you will have a much more participatory plan. Whereas now we have a plan that's prepared from somewhere in the state government, then that's passed on to the city, and then that plan is then imposed on to the people, and at the last level, at the area planning level, you ask them to participate.
All right.
Then they already find that a huge road is being put through their settlement over which they have no say because it's already a legally tenable document.
Sure. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank both my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. Before I go, of course, the takeaways from this debate: strengthen the municipal corporation. We need to be better prepared. The cities need to be better prepared, and local bodies need to be more autonomous, is what our guests are saying here. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.